On this episode of the Naturist Living Show, The Feral Girl.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show is brought to you by Burrows Family Naturist Park. At Burrows, we offer traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Free your body, free your mind. www.burrows.ca.
Welcome, dear listener, to episode 154 of the Naturist Living Show. My name is Stéphane Deschênes. I'm your host for this podcast and the owner of Burrows Family Naturist Park. And the show's producer is Samantha Graham, who keeps us going, keeps this happening, keeps the show coming out by doing a lot of work in editing. And we appreciate all the folks who support us financially through donations or Patreon. Right, Sam?
Yes, absolutely, Stefan. We want to give a huge shout out to some very special people who support me over on Patreon. We've got Brian A., Donald S., The Phantom, Robert O., and Ben T. This episode is dedicated to you. And thank you to all of our Patreons. We truly appreciate the support. I truly appreciate the support month after month. It doesn't go unnoticed. And you're going to start seeing a little bit more content on Patreon from me. I've finally carved out some time, and so there's going to be some behind-the-scenes stuff. You're going to know when episodes are going to be coming out, what's next coming out for episodes. So if you want to be a Patreon, you can head over to patreon.com/Naturist Living Show, all one word, and sign up. Thank you to all of our listeners. Your support listening month after month to every one of our episodes is also very appreciated. And now back to our episode.
So today's show is called The Feral Girl because that's the title of the most recent book from Nick Alimonos. And this is the second edition, if you will, of the our book review format, where I interview the author, not having read the book, and our completely anonymous reviewer writes a review, which I record with a computer voice, and play afterwards so that it is completely independent and it is completely objective. And I can interview Nick in this case without either feeling bad because it's a bad review, if that's what it is, or, feeling good, I guess, if it's a good review. And at this point, I don't know because I still have not listened to the review or put it together. So Nick contacted us a while ago and sent me his book. And I haven't read it, but I know from the summary and from talking to him as well that it's not strictly a naturist book specifically, but it does have a lot of themes. He is a naturist and he believes in naturism. So it has a lot of themes that are relevant to naturism, including the lack of clothing worn by many of the characters in this sort of fantasy book. But enough about that. Let's listen to Nick and our discussion about what he writes about and why he does it and what's influenced him or given him inspiration.
My name is Nick Alimonos. I am an author. I am also a nudist, and I'm the author of the Anya series. And because I, had a passion for naturism for most of my life, it was only natural that these interests would come together and be expressed through my writing.
And which part of the world are we reaching you in?
So I live in Florida. It's where I grew up, but my parents are both Greek. They're both from the town of Sparta. And so every summer, I used to spend most of my summers on the Greek islands. And I was exposed to a lot of nudity, casual nudity on the Greek islands. So that was kind of my earliest introduction to nudism.
And so, are you an author? Is that your business? Do you make a living with it?
Well, so currently I work in a restaurant. Been doing that for 20 years because, like every Greek person, I think it's a law that you have to work at a restaurant if you're Greek. But that was my dad's dream, and my dream was always to be a writer. Since I was 6, that's all I really wanted to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm planning to sell my business soon, so I can devote myself full time to writing and try to make a living from it. But it's not easy.
It is not easy. I mean, you think it's possible?
Well, I definitely think I'm good enough. I've gotten really phenomenal reviews from magazines and book critics and Kirkus magazine, and so really it's really about getting your foot in the door and just getting known. It's kind of like going viral online. It's like once people know you, it's easier. But that's the hard part, is getting known.
Yeah,
So,
being good is important, of course, but it's not does not guarantee success. There are several famous authors who have tried publishing under different names, and it doesn't work until people find out that Bachman is really Stephen King, for example.
right.
And then suddenly, oh yeah, now people want to read the books. So
Yeah,
being known, I
that's
think,
true.
is the bigger challenge, isn't it?
That is the biggest challenge. And although, I'm not really doing it for the money. I do it because storytelling, that's my first love. That's what I care about most. So, if I just write and never make any money, I'm not going to regret it because I do it, because I love it. But of course, it'd be nice to make a living as well. So I'm just going to keep doing it till I die. And I am known a little bit. I'm not like completely obscure. I'm just trying to get picked up by a big publisher right now. That's the challenge, is getting picked up by a big publisher.
What type of books do you write?
So I write fantasy adventure, which I feel actually fits really well with naturism because, and I'm kind of surprised that a lot of people aren't aware of this, but if you look at the earliest form of fantasy, which I consider the Greek myths, I consider the Odyssey and the Iliad are fantasy stories. And if you see the way that those heroes were depicted in art, in the classical arts, most of them are naked. Perseus, Hercules, Theseus, the Greek gods are naked. Even though a lot of the biblical heroes are naked. So it was the way that I think ancient people used to conceive of their heroes as being naked. So for me, it was kind of a no-brainer. I was like, well, I'm a nudist and I write fantasy, and my fantasy's heavily inspired by mythology. So it wasn't a stretch to make naturist heroes.
So would you say that these are naturist stories?
Okay, so I hesitate to call it a naturist book, mostly because right now there's kind of a little bit of a stigma where, I don't want to be like typecast or labeled, because a lot of naturist books are really written for the express purpose of promoting naturism. And that's not really what I'm doing. The difference between what I'm doing and what a lot of other naturist authors do is you could take the naturism out of my books and they're still entertaining and they're so interesting. And a lot of my readers and my fans are not naturists and don't have any interest in naturism. And the fact that some of the characters are nudists, that's just an incidental thing, which is the way I think it should be. I don't think that nudism should define a person,
So how are they nudists? I mean, this is fantasy. They're not walking around in downtown Miami. They are, it's set in a fantasy world, I assume, right?
Yes,
I haven't read the
yes.
books for everybody.
Yes. Okay.
We have a review coming, of course, of the books, but
Right.
I didn't read the book, nor am I doing the review. So we're just talking about the process, right?
Sure. Right. So a lot of people, a lot of the naturist books I've read, it's about people discovering nudism.
Right.
And because they're living in a normal society, or the textile world. Well, I took the opposite approach because I'm very fascinated with primitive people and ancient people and people like who live in the Amazon, like the Zoe tribe, that those people have never seen clothes before, or before Europeans kind of invaded their land. Another good book is I think it's called The Land of Naked People, and that was about the Sentinelese people, which is a chain of islands in the Indian Ocean. And these are the most remote people on Earth. And in the book, the author, who is an anthropologist studying these people, she says, before Europeans came to the island, they didn't know clothing was a thing because their climate really didn't require clothing. And so that was the tack that I took, and I created a fictional primitive society called the Ilmar, and they live in an ideal climate, and they simply never develop clothing. So they don't really think of themselves as nudists, and they don't even really have a word for being naked, because that's just a standard for them. That's just the way life is. But what happens, because the story needs drama, so when there's a famine, and this is I go into more detail in The Feral Girl about this. There's a famine, and the people are starting to starve, and they have to leave from that part of the world. And so one of my characters, Thalana, she discovers civilization, and she discovers that when she's outside of her environment where she grew up, people don't think of nakedness the same way. They kind of frown on her nakedness, and so that's where that's my approach to it.
So the Feral Girl is not your first book. It's part of a series, books of Enya.
Yeah.
And so is that the same characters throughout, or are you telling different stories each time?
So I'm telling different stories. The first book is Ages of Enya. That's a more epic fantasy. There's a lot of different locations and characters and cultures. It's not only, about naked people. Enya is a big place. But the second book, The Princess of Enya, that was a spinoff. And the reason I like to do spinoffs is because I don't want people to feel like, well, I have to read all the books to know what's going on. So you could just read The Princess of Enya and understand the story. But it takes place in the same world. Now, The Princess of Enya doesn't really have any nudism in it. But the next book, The Feral Girl, I wanted to go back and tell this like a prequel story about how Thalana, who's one of the main characters in Ages of Enya, where she came from. I thought that would be an interesting story. It's really a survival story, and about how she had to go through the jungle, and it was partly inspired from Naked and Afraid, that show, if you've ever watched that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
And also it was inspired from my own experiences hiking naked through the woods, which is something I really like to do. I like, when I was in the Greek islands, I used to do a lot of nude hiking, and in Florida too. And I think it's for me, it's a deeply spiritual experience, and so for me, like I like to think of naturism and more from like the European mindset, where for them it's more about connecting to nature. So that I try to express that in my book, The Feral Girl, the latest one I just finished.
That's very interesting. So you called fantasy. How is it different from just being fiction? What makes something fantasy versus just fiction?
Well, that's a good question. So there's a lot of debate about that, but typically with fantasy, it takes place in a world that's very similar to ours, but it has things in it that doesn't exist in our world, So, of course, she's a human being. She's going through a forest. One thing that was interesting is I had to name a lot of the plants and trees and stuff. So I use real world names because how else would I, you know what a palm tree is if that wasn't a thing. But then she encounters things that don't exist in our world. Like she encounters a group of ape-like, intelligent, ape-like creatures called half-men, which they're sort of like between like ape and like modern humans. There's also dinosaurs in the book. And we know from paleontology that, humans and dinosaurs never coexisted. But in this world, she does coexist with them. So that's the fantasy aspect.
So how do you, this is book, so it's words, there's no images. So how do you go about having characters not wear clothes who don't even have a concept of wearing clothes? Obviously, they're not standing around talking and saying, "Hi, I'm naked."
Yes,
because they don't even know what that means.
Yes, that's a good question. I actually, when I set out to write the book, I thought it might be interesting to not even mention it or talk about it at all until the very end when she gets to civilization, because spoiler alert, but she eventually gets out of the jungle, and that's when she encounters, for lack of a better word, textile society, and then there's a reaction to that. And I was going to do that, but if you read it, there are times when like she will look at her reflection in a pond, and I might talk about how like she has a scar in a part of her body. It's a balancing act, but one thing I avoid doing is I try not to talk about or describe body parts, because the emphasis is not, on body parts. Sometimes I'll have people say, when I tell them I'm a nudist, they'll be like, "Oh, you guys are obsessed with, genitals." And I'm like, "We're not obsessed with genitals. You're obsessed with genitals, because you're the one that's freaking out about genitals. We're not, as a nudist, I'm not going around thinking about genitals all the time, So it was a bit of a balancing act, writing it in such a way where I'm not really drawing attention to the fact that she's not wearing clothes. But I think if you read it, it's, there are moments when, she might sit down and she'll feel, for the texture of the ground, where she's sitting, things like that, clues you into what she's wearing.
One of the things that I find in the mainstream world, if you will, in the authors is, especially when describing women, they spend a lot of time describing their bodies.
Yes.
And of course, you have to, for the imagination, you have to give people an idea of what they look like, but there's no need for this whole, her firm breasts were topped with protruding nipples of whatever color and all that stuff that you hear. That wouldn't be very naturist, would it?
It wouldn't, and I'm not interested in doing that. And I've read that in a lot of books that are not naturists, where they will go into graphic detail. Even Robert Heinlein, who, I don't know if you're familiar, but he's one of the most famous science fiction authors, was a professed nudist, but he wrote a book called Glory Road that had a nudist character in it, but he also takes about a couple of pages describing this woman's body, which I didn't feel was very in keeping with the nudist philosophy. So I tried to avoid doing that. Now, where I kind of got into trouble is I did produce some artwork for the book, mostly for promotional reasons. And what will end up happening is that some people who haven't read the book, they'll just look at the pictures. And again, I tried to create pictures that are tastefully done, not sexualized. But, and a lot of people get it, but some people will look at those pictures and they just sort of imagine the kind of story that I'm writing. And they're making assumptions about what the book is about. And they're thinking it's some kind of fetish. And it's not, And that's why on the cover, I don't know if anyone's going to see this, but on the cover, I just put a picture of her face. Because, if I put her whole body, people might get the wrong idea. So I wanted to avoid that.
Yeah, and it's a picture, where she's even got some scratches and things like that on her face because she's been obviously going through some rough areas or something. So it's very normal looking. But it's true though, if you look at a lot of the imagery in fantasy in particular, it's more like Lara Croft kind of people looking, like from the video games, very Barbie-like.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Bodies and
yeah.
So why is that a thing in fantasy? Is that because it's men doing it, or
sex sells?
And yeah.
And I have kind of struggled with my artists because, like, there's some pictures of Falana out there that I'm not particularly proud of, and I've actually removed some from the internet because I'm working with an artist and I'm trying to explain to them what I want to see, and they can't help it. They're just drawing real sexy bodies, and although she's a young girl and she's very athletic. And she's very strong. I describe her as having like a gymnast body. So she's not going to be, she's going to be fit. She's going to be physically fit because of what she's doing and what she has to do. But one thing she doesn't need is really big boobs. In fact, that might even be a hindrance. If you're running away from a dinosaur and you have really big boobs, that's not going to work. So I tell my artists, okay, she's got really small boobs. Almost, there's a point in the book where I describe her as almost being like a boy up top, but try to tell that to an artist and like they can't. It's like they physically can't draw small boobs. They don't know how to do it. I don't know.
Or is it because you're using a male artist instead of a female artist? Maybe
that's a good point. And there are some illustrations in the book, and I have two artists. One is a great illustrator from the Ukraine, which his name is Alexei Lipatov. He's awesome. He's one of my go-to artists. He does a pretty good job giving me what I want. But the other artist is a friend of mine who is Heather is her name, and she's also an illustrator. And I can tell there's a definite difference between the way she draws the character and the way he draws the character. I try to get them to match up, but you can tell that if it's a guy drawing it, the emphasis is a little different than the way that she's drawing it. So,
Interesting.
But I had a lot of beta readers read my book before I came out, and I did have a lot of female beta readers. And I asked them, listen, if there's any accidental sexism on my part, let me know so I can change it. And I didn't have any complaints with that book. So
if a textile read the book because you're trying to appeal to a mass audience, not specifically the niche of naturism.
Yes.
Would they have any idea that you're a naturist?
I'm not really sure, but I think that they would probably assume that I was promoting a naturist lifestyle or a naturist point of view. Although I tried to tone that down. In Agents of Anya, it's more... In my first book, it's more explicit, and some people accuse me of being preachy. So with this book, I really wanted to be subtle because I think subtlety is much more effective. So I do think that, some of my readers have responded to me, and they told me, they said, yeah, after reading this book, I don't see why not. Why can't people be naked? Why does it have to be sexualized? And I think that message comes across a lot stronger at the end of the book when she encounters civilization and a community that frowns upon casual nudity.
And so that's at the end of the book. So
yeah.
And when you talk about a civilization, you're talking about modern day kind of Western civilization?
It's a small village. It's not, it's still in the fantasy realm. It's a small village. You could think of it as maybe a small European village. And again, because it's fantasy, I could have had the whole world be nudist. But I thought if I do that, there's no drama. You need to have some kind of drama. And so I thought it would be interesting if when she comes to this culture, there's a culture clash, because I find culture clashes interesting. It creates creates good storytelling. and see how, how she responds to it and how the people respond to her. Again, I don't want to give too much away. You have to read the book to find out what happens. And I think in a subtle way, the nudist naturist ethos is expressed, I hope. But if not, then the reader just said, oh, that was a fun story, and I enjoyed it. So.
Yeah, we can express the ethos without actually saying it. And do you ever say, like when you do author interviews, or is it in your bio, long-time nudist or anything like that?
I used to do that. I used to be much more forthcoming about it. I had a blog where I have a literary blog, and where every now and then I would write a nudist article just because I wanted to express an idea about nudism. And so I was more forthcoming, but I think the problem was the algorithm. So the way the algorithm works, especially on Amazon, is if a whole bunch of a certain group of people buy a book, then it'll only recommend that book to a certain demographic, right? So what I noticed happening was I went on Amazon, and when I released The Princess of Anya, it said, people who bought this book also bought, and there's a list of just, not even fiction, just nudist books, just like the history of nudism, nudism in America, nude beaches. And I'm thinking, these books have nothing to do with what I'm writing. There's no real connection there. And so that kind of annoyed me, because I don't want, the book to only appeal to one group. I want it to be more widespread. And so I don't hide the fact that I'm a nudist. I just don't advertise as much because of that.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's a good way to appeal to the mainstream. And you talked about this being inspired by Naked and Afraid, and Naked and Afraid is not a naturist TV show per se. Nobody ever mentions that.
No, yes.
Except it's very much consistent with that, living without clothes and surviving without clothes in a slightly challenging environment. So,
I think that show, for me, I mean, I know that some people, say it's not one-to-one with naturism, but I found it very encouraging because it shows two things. One is that the contestants on the show, they seem to get used to each other very quickly, right? They're not like freaking out, oh my God, we're naked. It's like very quickly they get used to the fact that they're naked and they can see each other. And then the other thing is that I've seen a lot of episodes where maybe there's a problem with the footwear, like where they're walking and they need shoes. But I've never seen an episode where a guy's like, man, I really need underwear. If we don't get it packed, if we don't do something about covering our genitals, we're going to die. I've never seen that. That's not a big consideration. Shoes is a consideration at times, depending on the environment. But that's really about it. Sometimes sunburn, they got to worry about sunburn. But nothing unique about got to have a loincloth. So that kind of made me think it's totally plausible that you could live in the jungle without clothes. And we know this from the Amazon and other, real world tribes around the world that, it's not required for survival.
So how are the books doing?
Well, they're doing all right. Right now I'm an indie author, and, I had a big book signing. I was sitting with 150 authors in Gainesville, and it was all indie authors. So nobody really did particularly well because, again, it's hard when you're an indie author. But mine was one of the best-selling books over there. And there's also a few bookstores in my area, local bookstores. The big chains won't take it, like Barnes & Noble won't take it. But the small bookstores will take it, and they do very well. And, there's a big comic book store that the guy didn't sell novels. He only sells comics. But I've known the guy for 20 years. He's like a friend of mine. And I said, can you carry my book? He's like, sure. And he frequently runs out of copies and calls me up and tells me, we need more copies. And I'm like, okay. So I definitely think that if the books were in bookstores around the country, I think I'd do well. It's just a matter
Distribution is the challenge.
It's
yes?
it's distributed. I can only drive so far, and go to so many bookstores.
So you're self-publishing, and which means you make more money per book sold, presumably, right?
That's true. Yeah.
So I don't want to know the details, but are you 50% of the way towards having a living wage off writing? A quarter of the way?
No, I'm pretty far off. But again, it's all about getting a big publisher to notice you, and because I don't even know of any indie authors that make a living just from indie publishing. I do think they probably out there, but I don't know of any. So you really got to get the attention of the big publishers, all of which are in New York City. And I think maybe one of my problem is that I'm writing about nudism, because right now it's such a highly competitive market. When I got out of college, I was told by my professors, because I have a degree in fiction, I was told by my professors that you have to be original and write your passions. And I'm thinking, well, for me, I this is ideal because, I'm passionate about nudism, and there's not a lot of nudist books out there. So I'm like, I got the perfect thing. But I guess maybe that wasn't the best advice, because it seems like what agents and publishers are really looking for is something that is on the shelf, that's sold well, and that's similar, a little different, but not too different from what's selling currently. That's what they want, really.
Yeah, but there's lots of things that are selling. I don't know how you can have a style. I mean, your books are not specifically about nudism.
They're not, no.
That's not what it says. And what nudity seems to sell. I mean, Game of Thrones was nothing but nudity and violence. That's a TV show. Yes, I know. 50 Shades of Grey was not even well written, and it sold like crazy.
Yes.
So
50 Shades of Grey was an outlier, I think. First of all, and I talked about this with my wife, because she says, you got to try to go more mainstream. And I said, and I always often pointed to 50 Shades of Grey. I said, this is a book about bondage. And somehow, I don't think that so many Americans are interested in bondage, but somehow that book sold really well. And now there's a whole bunch of imitators. So if you go to Barnes & Noble, there's a whole section of books that are copying that formula because it did so well. Mm-hmm. So it's possible that, maybe a nudist book, that will be something that will be unique and original, but it's hard to do something original. And I think agents and publishers are a little squeamish, and I think they're looking for something that's a little more mainstream. And I'm thinking too that if I make a name for myself, I'll have the freedom to write whatever I want, and then no one's going to care.
Well, that is true. Once you're successful, you can do anything you want, and
yes,
people can criticize you. You can ask J.K. Rowling; she is doing stuff that upsets a lot of people, but she's still super rich, so she can say anything she wants, I guess.
Yeah. So maybe I went about it the wrong way, because I kind of started off heavy, like a little heavy-handed with, I am a nudist and I'm promoting this. Maybe it could have been more subtle, more understated.
Again, I don't think it's their words. It's not like you're selling pictures, and I don't see how these words and ideas, if the story is interesting to people, would scare a publisher these days. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, like with the Feral Girl, I talk a lot about her growing up. She has a lot of flashbacks about her growing up, and she had 11 siblings, right? She's one of 12. So, and that's one of the reasons why they can't afford to keep all the children in the family. And so her parents, they actually sell one of her brothers as a slave. And then they just tell her, they said, listen, you're very tough. We think you can make it. Try to get through this jungle and find another place to go, because here we're all starving. So that's why I introduced the big family. And of course, if you're reading this and you know that they're all nudists, you're reading about nudist children. And that might, make some people uncomfortable because that's still a big taboo in our society. But what I will mention though is a lot of people don't know this, but in Stephen King's It, have you heard of It?
Yes. Yep. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So in that book, there is actually a child orgy. Okay, there's a bunch of kids get together and have sex, and I'm still shocked that he got away with that. Like how did the publisher say, oh, that's okay, that you could put that in there? But I guess he's Stephen King. He can do whatever he wants. I don't know. So maybe if I am more landed, more established,
Stephen King's It is because I just looked it up. It's from 1986. It's the same thing as the Blue Lagoon would never be made today either for the same reason.
Right.
We use and this is a problem I have. Like I don't think we have gone backwards in terms of our comfort with nudity in children. Like
agree. Yeah.
When my sister and I were young, nude children were just cute and adorable. Nobody thought about sex. Like nobody thought there was anything sexual about that.
Yes.
And we've become absolutely paranoid. We've, the Naturist Living Show lost its Twitter account. Burroughs most recently lost its Twitter account over stories and ideas. That's all, because we were talking about
that's crazy. Yeah.
Not showing children's genitals. I mean, the children are nude in one of the images, but you can't even see their bum, and that was too much.
Yeah.
So we've gone crazy. I don't think you could do it today, but I don't know if that's what's holding your books back. But I have no idea. Do you get any feedback? You must have pitched it to some people?
Surprisingly, I have never had a critic or a reviewer tell me that there's a problem with the nudity. It seems like when they read it, they get it. They understand where I'm coming from. The only problem I have is with people who don't read it, who people are looking at it and they're making assumptions about what I'm trying to write about or what they think I might be writing about. And those have been very few comments. But everyone who's actually read it, I've never had anyone say, oh, you got to take the nudity out. This isn't good. I've never had any negative feedback. And what you do remind me is one of my big inspirations growing up, we talked about Greek mythology, is the movie Clash of the Titans from the 80s. And in the 80s Clash of the Titans, because, they're trying to emulate the Greek, what the Greek arts, the classical art, there's a scene, very brief scene, it's only a few seconds long, but there's a scene where Perseus, young Perseus as a child, is walking along the beach with his mom, and they're both naked. And this was in the 80s. Nobody had a problem with it. In fact, the movie's rated PG. It's not even R, In the remake of Clash of the Titans, there's no scene like that. They took it out. So You're right. I mean, nowadays, we do seem to be more prudish. And I agree with you. I think you said somewhere in one of your podcasts that by doing that, we're actually sexualizing children. Mm-hmm. And I agree with that. If you're telling me that we have to hide kids because if we see them, we're going to think about sex, that's kind of messed up, Because if I see a naked kid, I'm not going to be thinking about sex. If you're telling me that you're going to be thinking about sex, then maybe you're the problem because I wouldn't think, that wouldn't come to my mind, So...
It's to the point that, we've there was a fair bit of research done about children and nudity in the 80s and 90s and even before that. And nothing in the last 20 years. And I've talked to more than one researcher who said it's an interesting topic, but it would be career suicide. People would not take you seriously, and the backlash potentially could really end someone's career. So there might be something to research. All the research actually that exists shows that it's either good or neutral. Nothing shows a negative impact.
Yes.
And Yet
Yeah.
we can't do any more research because of that. And actually, I think today we are shaming children's bodies so badly that if we did some research, we would find some real problems in terms of the attitude.
Oh, I agree. Well, yeah, and I also think too that, and I know this isn't my area of expertise, but if you're telling a kid, okay, you can't see any nudity or anything remotely like that, but as soon as you turn 18, go look at Pornhub. That's going to,
Right.
That's not going to be good for them. And I grew up, somewhat grew up in a nudist lifestyle because I went to a lot of these beaches when I was younger. And I'm probably the most prudish guy when it comes to sex. I'm like the Amish, it's like I didn't do like the kinds of things other people do, go to clubs and look for hookups. I never did, very, conservative in that regard. The kids I've known, like my kids, they're very okay, and I think that kids that are have grown up where that's always been the forbidden fruit, I think when they grow up, they go crazy. 18 and boom, I think they lose it. So, and I try to express a little bit, to bring it back to my books. I try to express a little bit in my fiction. I think that the world where my characters grow up, Thalana grows up, and Xander, it's her male counterpart, is a kind of a utopia.
Right.
So.
And I assume that the children, or when they're young, it's not about sex. It's just about not wearing clothes in your stories.
Yeah. In fact, they have a very strict, they're monogamous. And, compared to other fantasy stories, this is like really G-rated, but, there's a tradition that they have where there's something called the solstice night. I got this actually from a Russian thing where they celebrate the solstice by jumping over a fire, and that's how they get married. And so it's all very like traditional. I really, try to make it more traditional. They have sex and they have children, and they have family, nuclear families, and not because I'm saying there's anything wrong with other kinds of cultures, but that's just the kind of utopia I wanted to write about. So
you're self-publishing.
Yeah.
Which is great. You can self-publish today, which was really impossible 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's made it very accessible, the publishing, to authors everywhere. But the problem is anybody can self-publish. And so
yes.
How does a person know, or how do they decide? At least publishers used to be a gatekeeper. And the real junk would never, generally speaking, not make it out there. Unfortunately, they also kept out some really good stuff because they can only publish so much. So it's good and bad.
Yeah.
But you're buying books. How do you decide who to buy? How do you know?
Okay, so believe it or not, I've actually gone on record, and I'm really an outlier in the independent publishing world, because I've actually stated that I think it should be more difficult to get published, not easier. And I think companies like Amazon have kind of done a disservice to literature because they have flooded the market with literally anything. I mean, if you wanted to, publish your grocery lists, you could. I mean, just anything goes. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes very difficult for people like myself. I mean, it took me 9 years to write my first book. And I put everything that I'd learned since I was a kid and everything I went to college for. And then I see it being sold next to a book where a guy spent 2 weeks writing it, Same with The Feral Girl. It took me 2.5 years to write it. I did a lot of research. And I couldn't have written it without, I have a drawer full of hundreds of stories that are not very good, but I needed to write those stories to be able to learn how to write what I wrote today. And so, so now there's no vetting process. And if you go on Amazon, there's really no way of knowing the difference between me and someone who has never written anything but an email before and just decided, hey, I think I'll write a novel. Because it's a skill. Writing is a skill like any other thing.
Of course. So how does a person decide? How does a person know who they should bother buying the book from and who they shouldn't when they're on Amazon?
That's a good question. I probably wouldn't buy my own book because I just wouldn't come across it, because I mostly like to. I know it sounds funny, but I mostly read classics, and I try to read like the best writing, Pulitzer Prize winners, and because I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to learn from the best in the business. So I have a very high bar. I mean, some people have different goals, right? Some people, they just write because it's fun and they don't really care how many books you sell. Other people, they're writing for a very specific niche, and that's where a lot of the nudists come in. There's a lot of nudist authors that all they're really interested in is selling books to other nudists, and that's all they want to do. But me, I'm trying to get into the proverbial shelf. I'm trying to get on the shelf with other great authors. So I primarily just read the greats. And what I'm hoping is that someday when I do get, let's say, discovered, then people will go back and look at my older catalog of books and say, oh, yeah, that guy, he also wrote these other books, and they're good too,
Yeah. Well, it's fine to write for a niche, but a bad story is a bad story. I don't care if it's about a topic I like. If it's not interesting or not well written. I tried reading 50 Shades of Grey, and I couldn't get past the first couple chapters because it was so it was dull in my mind.
Yes, exactly. It's not. Yeah, I don't consider that a well-written book, and for me, it has to be well-written.
No, I wanted to learn why. I wanted to understand why it was successful, so I started reading it because I was curious of the cultural. It had such a cultural impact, and I was going, I don't get it. Why does anybody continue to read this?
Yeah, it's a mystery to me too. But I agree with you. Like, if there's a book out there that is well written and has nothing to do with nudism, I'm interested. If there's a book that is about nudism and it's not well written, then then I'm not gonna care. And I've tried to read a couple nudist books by nudist authors, and they were not very well written, and so I stopped reading them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also run across the problem of books that were written by people who said they're nudists, and I don't want to mention names or titles because I don't want to hurt anybody. But certain books that I read that were clearly what I would call exhibitionist books, where the character is getting aroused by being naked, and there's a lot of graphic details of body parts, and there's a lot of sexual stuff going on and masturbation, and I'm like, that's an exhibitionist book, and I don't know why they need. And you know what? I'm not judging them. If they want to write an exhibitionist book, great, but they should call it what it is. I wrote an exhibitionist book. You didn't write a nudist book. That's not that's not a nudist book. Mm-hmm. So I've run across that problem too, which I find really irritating. As soon as that comes up, I'm like, okay, this is not nudist. So
no, and most nudist books are very predictable. It's either people who accidentally stumbled on a place, they just wake up in the morning in their cottage they've rented and discovered, they're in the middle of a nudist club, or somehow the car breaks down or whatever. The story is very similar, or the discovery of naturism somehow through a friend or something. I don't, so why does a story have to be about naturism or nudism? Why can it just not be set there? I don't know.
Well, I will say, and I should probably bring this up, I'm not the first to do this. The first to do this, what I'm doing, was Edgar Rice Burroughs. Edgar Rice Burroughs was writing in the one of the first ever fantasy authors. He's the creator of Tarzan. And now, I don't recommend... One thing about Tarzan is it's a shockingly racist book. And a lot of people don't know this. And it's not racist like today, like everyone's very sensitive about race. It is like a shockingly racist book. Like, you'd be surprised what's in Tarzan. However, in the first half of that book, Tarzan's naked. He doesn't wear a loincloth because, you know, the apes that raised him didn't raise him to wear anything.
He lives in the jungle.
Yeah, he lives in the jungle until the British showed up. And the same author wrote another book called John Carter, or it's a John Carter series. And the first book in the series is called The Princess of Mars. And in that book, the main character is naked through the whole book. And he meets a character, Deja Torres. And this book is over 100 years old, by the way. It's a very old book. But the main characters are naked through the whole book, and it's not a big deal. Like, they don't. He doesn't sexualize it. He doesn't talk about it all the time. He mentions it a couple times that they're naked because on Mars, I guess, they don't wear clothes. And that's it. So if you were to point to an author who does close to what I've written, is Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan. But that was 100 years ago, and I guess it fell out of fashion to write that way. I don't know.
So what's your next book? Do you have that in mind already?
Oh, I'm working on it. I'm going to be writing all the time. So my next book is a young adult book, and it has nothing to do with naturism or nudism. Yeah. But it does take place in the same world because it's a planet-sized world, and there's different locations. So sometimes I'll hear people say, "Oh, Anya is the nudist world." Well, it's not. It's not. It just, there's a part of it called Ilmarinen where the nudist characters are, but there's other parts of the world where they're not nudist. And so the book I'm writing now, I'm writing it with the intent of trying to make it go mainstream and get picked up by a big publisher. Now, I don't know how that's going to work with my other books. They might object and say, well, this book is fine, but we don't want it related to these other nudist books. That might confuse people. If that's the case, maybe I'll write under a pseudonym. I don't know. But I'm just trying to write a book that, is going to be more for general readers. And then hopefully they'll discover, The Feral Girl and my other books. Because I do have a lot of fans who are saying, hey, when are you going to write your next Xander and Thalana book? Those are my naked heroes. And I say, well, I'd love to write more about them, but right now I'm trying to go mainstream. Once I do that, then yeah, I'll probably write more about Thalana, my clothing-averse heroes.
You know how to write.
Yeah.
You majored in writing, and you've done it for a long time. So this is not just a book that's written because you were in a mood one afternoon.
No, and like I said, I'm drawing from my experiences, going to, I'll tell you, like, for example, I think if I didn't go nude hiking, certain things I wouldn't know to write about, right? So one time I'm hiking through the woods and I feel something on my skin, just a very subtle sensation. What is that? I look down, it's a spider web. If I wasn't naked, I wouldn't have seen it. And there's a big spider on there, like a quarter-sized spider. And I'm thinking, yeah, like, I could put that in my book, It's like when you're naked, you're more aware of your surroundings, of your environment, things like that. So I'm also drawing from my experiences, which I think adds a level of authenticity, I think, to the work.
And now for the review of The Feral Girl by our anonymous book reviewer, who we thank very much, even though we can't say who it is, so that he or she can continue to produce very objective and independent reviews.
The Feral Girl. The third book in author Nick Alimonos' Books of Enya series, The Feral Girl, is a standalone prequel offering a coming-of-age backstory for the Lana, a pivotal character in the series. Fear not, however. The reader unfamiliar with the other works in the Enya series will not find themselves at a loss for background information or context. The Feral Girl does not bank on the reader already holding a deep understanding of story or character details gleaned through the other books, and is a perfectly fine place to start the Books of Enya series. The intimate storyline, manageable cast of characters, and gradual world-building all work to provide a welcoming point of entry into this expansive world that tickles at the edges of both fantasy and science fiction, yet coyly commits to neither. This is a story of survival, adventure, and perseverance, with overarching messages surrounding environmental collapse, societal dysfunction, and human nature. At the start of the novel, our heroine, Thalana, is forced to leave her family home and the once plentiful land of her people, due to a prolonged and worsening period of scarcity. Her people, the Ilmar, live harmoniously with nature, with a deeply ingrained cultural appreciation for the natural world and how to both survive off of it and care for it. And it is this experience which has uniquely prepared her for her journey. What she is less prepared for, however, is a sprawling landscape of inhospitable climes, monstrous beasts, and, perhaps worst of all, confrontations with the civilized world, the one that ravages the earth for resources, that treats others with disrespect, and that views Thalana and her nakedness as shameful and inhuman. Throughout this journey, we are frequently invited into glimpses of Thalana's childhood as she mines her memories for the strength to persevere. These moments provide valuable insights into her principles and motivations, into what has prepared her for this journey, and into the relationships she has with her family and community. This adventure is not purely one of strife and survival, however, but is intertwined with lessons about our own world and our own struggles. As Thalana describes the ravaged landscapes she traverses, the abandoned cities, and the scorched earth, we cannot help but see our own world reflected back at us. When she describes the greed and avarice that led to these conditions, it is difficult to not see the error in our own relationship to one another and to our planet. When she marvels at how her fully clothed or fully armored acquaintances hold such negative and backwards views about bodies, we as readers again cannot help but recognize the state of our own society and its phobia of the human body. None of these lessons feel heavy-handed, however, but contribute to Thalana's blossoming understanding of the larger world and the reconciliation of her cultural values with what she needs to do to survive in a world where clothing and armor are the rule and not the exception, where the people live in cities, disconnected from the natural world yet keen on dominating it, and where exploitation and war reign supreme. The Feral Girl does not purport to be a naturist novel, if such a thing exists. The naturist reader, however, will undoubtedly be drawn to Thalana's plight, not because Thalana spends the majority of the novel nude, and not because the story itself aligns with a naturist worldview. In Thalana's world, there is no such concept as naturism or nudism as we know them, but her upbringing within a corner of her world where people live in harmony with nature and where clothing is neither necessary nor culturally relevant means that, in her journey, she experiences the world through an untainted and naturally inquisitive lens. The naturist reader will recognize Thalana's astonishment at the ways of the clothed world from their philosophy, but probably not from their own lived experience, and is likely to relish the opportunity to view the world afresh, stripped of the burden of taking for granted the trappings and tolls of modern society. For the reader, who already enjoys a coming-of-age story, tales of survival, hints of fantasy, and a sprinkle of science fiction, or who is curious about this combination of themes, I cannot recommend this book, or this series of books enough. The writing is strong, smart, and expansive without ever feeling inaccessible or overly complex, incorporating gripping emotional struggles and fast-paced pursuits with equal care and success. For the naturist reader, finding these qualities in a story that also validates, or at least aligns with, naturist philosophy make The Feral Girl worth the read.
So in this case, this is a good review, as you've heard, and I'm sure you might enjoy reading this book and getting this book. It's quite a challenge publishing, as you've heard us discuss, because you can, anybody can publish a book, which means there's a lot of things out there, and there's a lot of things that are not very good, written by people who don't really know what they're doing, but have some idea or inspiration. So I hope that this service, if you will, that we're providing is going to help you, at least with regards to books that have themes or ideas that are relevant to naturism, and so that you'll know what's worth getting and what's worth reading. So that will be all for this episode of the Naturist Living Show for the second edition of our book review format. Thank you for listening. My name is Stéphane Deschênes again, and I'm the host of the podcast and the owner of Burrows Family Naturist Park. And we thank Samantha Graham very much, who makes the task of producing this show so much easier by doing all the editing and time-consuming putting together and coordinating and organizing. The Naturist Living Show's theme music is The Day We Met by Mark Hodges. And you can support Samantha, not me, I don't get any of the money, by giving a little bit of money every month on Patreon. Just, like a coffee a month. Goes a long way to helping her keep going with this show as her job. The show sponsorship is patreon.com/Naturist Living Show. One word. And we also thank everyone, even if you're not contributing financially, we thank you for listening, and we thank you for supporting us with your comment, and we thank you for sharing the show with others and telling others about it. You can keep sending comments, and we appreciate reading it. The show's email address is contact@Naturist Living Show, or you can call and leave a comment at country code 1-905-473-6060, which, not surprisingly, is Burroughs' main phone number. And then you dial extension 333 to get the Naturist Living Show voicemail. I hope you enjoyed the show, and that you'll join us again for the next episode of the Naturist Living Show.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show was brought to you by Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park. Traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Traditional values means that naturism is more than just taking your clothes off. It is a life philosophy with physical, psychological, environmental, social, and moral benefits. Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park strives to promote those naturist values in a modern setting that provides the amenities and services that our members and visitors expect. Free your body, free your mind. Learn more at www.bareoaks.ca.
Even though I've never gone on Naked and Afraid. Sometimes I think maybe I should have gone on the show, but I think I'm a wimp, and I probably would have tapped out after 3 days. But, I don't know.
I would definitely be a wimp about it. I have no interest in that kind of discomfort.
Yeah.